Hey, so look, welcome everyone to another edition of the Austin Tech Leaders Podcast, a series where we're having expert interviews with some of the top minds in the tech industry from Austin and wider across the United States. Today, I'm joined with the brilliant Bryan Mishkin, CTO at Newpoint at the moment, and looking at discussing with him something that we've seen come up a lot in the market or through leaders that we're speaking to about making that balance between innovation and cost. We're seeing the effects of potential recession, budgets tightening, and businesses having to look at cuts in certain areas. But there's also the need for innovation and continuing to progress as a business. So this is a conversation piece that I'm really looking forward to. So we've spoken before, Bryan, and people have probably seen conversations between us online previously, but it's probably worth giving a brief introduction for anyone who's not familiar with your work.
Sure. So I'll briefly say, I've been in technology since, graduating in 2001. I've been around Austin for, 21 years here, and I progressively, moved up in various capacities to the CTO chair. Started my career as an engineer. I've seen a lot of different things. I was part of building a lot of legacy systems back in the early 2000s that companies now look at and say, we need to do something about this. And so I'm very well versed with that. I've worked with a lot of companies to modernize their technology and their infrastructure specifically so that it would unlock more for them and specific to innovation and things like that. So I've got a lot of experience working with companies to understand not only tech debt, but what I'll call architectural debt or legacy systems, which is a much more complicated problem in my view, and much more expensive problem in my view than the tech debt that we kind of build up week to week, day to day in our development processes. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me, and hoping I can add value to the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Bryan. Well, as I say, big thing we're looking at is how businesses are going to strike the balance with innovation, and innovation often requires investment, both in terms of time and resources, and just general costs. So could you share an example from your experience where a company has successfully struck that balance between fostering innovation and managing their budget constraints?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can definitely do that. When I was working at Deveris, we had the need for a mobile application that we wanted to put out there, and unfortunately, Deveris's architecture was structured as a monolithic system built in a cold fusion technology that was older. The database was fortunately something that we could interact with fairly readily, but the code itself was not conducive to standing up a mobile app in a modern context today, where you really want to serve up data as a web service and have the mobile front end handle a lot of the front end processing and logic. And so we really had to kind of step back, look at our system, and identify what we were going to need web service wise for this to work, design out those services, make sure that they would work with the database structure that was in place. Fortunately, they would, and we were able to make them work, and then serve up the data so that we could build out a mobile app, right? But we only chose to serve up the data for those web services in a very narrow context for what was needed for the app. We could have said, well, let's make everything web service based, right, and converted everything, but that would have taken a lot of time, and we just had to make some decisions based on getting a product out the door. But as an ancillary to that, we were then also able to use those web services for certain transactions on the web as well. So we were able to take some of the screens that were in the monolithic architecture and modernize them a little bit more, use a front end technology like React as opposed to the older jQuery library that was in place, and actually interact with the data in a more meaningful way and in a more modern way. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I see as challenges for companies right now, is that if you have legacy infrastructure, you almost certainly have legacy architecture, and those two things are not set up for a modern context. Monolithic architectures, older monolithic architectures didn't think about having multiple front ends interacting with your data store way back in the early 2000s. And again, I know because I was a part of building some of those systems.
Oh, and so that one thing you mentioned, the sort of monolithic architecture there. something I read a few weeks ago, and again, this is probably going slightly off subject, but there's businesses that are moving back towards that type of architecture, like Amazon being one of them. It's probably away from the subject, but what's your thoughts on that? Is there a reason that that's more beneficial for certain businesses than maybe smaller, or?
Well, I'm not sure of the context with which we're talking about. Generally, most companies I've worked with want to go to a more microservices focused architecture with a
Yeah.
web front end or a mobile front end on there. I'd have to understand a little bit more about the use case for that. Generally speaking, a monolithic architecture in a modern context is not very flexible. And so the main reason that the monolithic architecture isn't flexible is because the typical separation of concerns that you would expect to see in engineered code isn't there. Everything's all blended, right? The database comes back with data. That data is reformatted right in the code into HTML, right? Whereas what you do in a modern context is you serve the data up free of any styling via a web service, and then the front end, whether it be a mobile app, a website, generative AI, something else, is responsible for styling that and showing it in a way that's meaningful to the user or the consumer, right? You can syndicate content out that way through RSS and other methods.
Okay, yeah, I say it's sort of, as I say, off plan, but it's just something that popped into my head. I read an article a couple of weeks ago that Amazon were looking to move back towards that type of architecture rather than microservices. I didn't, I can't give you much context, much other context behind it than that. But yeah, it was just interesting. But look, as you know, in terms of prioritizing innovation for businesses, CTO plays a crucial role in driving technology and innovation within any company. In your role as a CTO now and in the past, how do you determine which innovative ideas or projects are worth pushing forward, especially when you've got limited resources?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question, Patrick. I think when it comes to innovation, I view there as two different ways you approach an innovation problem. Okay, and the initial problem when we innovate is that we're doing something that no one else has done in the market. There's no data out there. There's nothing that generally tells us how this is going to work, whether consumers are going to use it, what the value is. We think we have an idea. We think people are going to do something with it, but there's not a lot of data or information out there, right? So the first, if someone approaches me with an innovative idea that they want to go put together, my first thing to them is, okay, what is the MVP for a proof of concept? And I'm using very specific words here because a proof of concept is not a production ready code. It's not a production ready feature, right? It is, what do you need to test this out, collect more information, validate your theories, validate your information, see if this will work, and if we want to invest more money into this to decide to build out a more full feature set or productionalize it, right? So we take that approach. I advise companies to take that test and learn approach first. Put something out there that's very lightweight, see if your customers will consume it, get some data about the usage of it, get some insights on it. It may give you some additional direction in terms of where you want to go. And then if you validate your theories or you feel like, this actually validates something that's worth more investment, we can build a P&L around it, et cetera, then you go build a project around it. And that project has implementation plans and roadmaps and things like that for the feature. But I prefer to take a test and learn approach first to vet anything that comes in as a feature that, where we can't describe those things. So the first question I tend to ask business partners is, how much do you expect this to add to the bottom line? How much do we expect this to cost, right? And so we're looking for things that are obviously going to be good bets that we can place, right? And if somebody, oftentimes with innovation, people can't answer those questions. They just don't know. They don't have the data. They don't know how many impressions this thing is going to get. Yeah. They don't know how many, subscriptions this thing's going to drive, right? And so you put it out there, you test it for a month or two, you collect some information, and then you can build out a P&L around it and really build the business justification for moving a full-blown project forward with all the different things that might be needed to make that happen, right? And if you keep it very narrowly focused, even if you have tech debt or your infrastructure isn't always conducive to that, you can decide with minimal investment in terms of improving your infrastructure whether that's something you want to move forward with. You could even do it in a way that doesn't require a lot of code, right? I've worked with great product people myself and sat down with them and worked through using Zapier and forms like Google Forms or I'm trying to think of another one, but there's form providers out there that collect data and send that data to a system. And for a proof of concept where you want to prove something out, that may be enough. You don't need to do
Yeah.
anything with engineers or coding there or invest a ton of money to do that. Test, learn, iterate, right? Develop a business case, develop a business plan, and then bring the full project to bear. The mistake that most people make with innovation is they just go, right?
Yeah.
They're like, let's go put this whole thing in. And the challenge that you have is if you put something in and you try to take it away, it becomes very difficult, right? And so if you're not sure, if you don't have a valid business case, you put something in and a year later, you're like, you know what? This ain't really doing what we thought it was going to do. We're losing money on it. We need to pull it. Someone's going to come along and be like, hold on a minute. We got customers using this thing and we can't just pull it out, right? And so you may still be able to do that and work through that, but it just becomes more difficult to do than saying, hey, we're going to test this feature out. We're going to select a core group of customers we want to expose this feature to, and we want to collect their feedback, and we know they're going to give us feedback, right? And we're going to collect our own analytic data. What is that data? I don't know. To build out a business case to do the full-blown investment. But because everything costs money, that's the better way to do it, because then you at least have some validation that the investment you're going to make is going to pay off.
Yeah, I think that's not true in any business at all. Whether it's on the tech side or a business like ours, we're looking at as we had mentioned off before the recording, we're looking at pivoting the business slightly and moving much more towards that more than we already are, but really going full steam ahead with that solutions based offering. And that's taking, looking at the strategy, iterating, changing things, tweaking different methods, different approaches, and as you say, getting feedback maybe from the market. So it works. That scenario that you just laid out there isn't just for building a new application or doing some sort of tech innovation. It's actually innovating in any way for any business and trying to change the way you work. So it's a really good answer there. Thanks very much. And I suppose that leads us really onto budget management. Mm-hmm. Now, budgets invariably need adjusting due to various factors, and it's hard for any company to stick to a hard and fast budget over a long period of time because of economic changes or changes within what needs to happen within the business. But is there a scenario that you could share with us where you've had to adapt to budget or a reason why to seize a valuable opportunity, or you've seen something that's popped up, or someone, maybe an engineer or someone in the team said, we've got this idea and it's like, I know that would work. We need to flex the budget or change it. Is there a scenario where that's happened in the past?
Trying to think now. Yeah, I mean, I think there has been a scenario where that's happened. I mean, we had, in Deveris, I'm going to kind of cite that. I can think of at least one instance where we had a partner that wanted to come to us and have us build out a service for them that they could go sell in the marketplace, sort of as a white label service for employment verification. And so we didn't budget for that project. That was an opportunity for us to, basically do something as sort of a service provider for a third party and make money off of it if it was successful, right? And so, we basically looked at what they were wanting us to do, what the cost was going to be, what the impacts were going to be to our other projects. We, adjusted our portfolio of projects accordingly. We allocated some additional dollars into, doing that, knowing that the money was going to come back as well, right, from the customer we were paying for. We sized it out properly, and then we kind of went and moved. A lot of what I recommend companies do when it comes to this stuff is create pools of money so that you have more flexibility, as opposed to trying at the beginning of a year to assign a pool of dollars to individual projects. That gives you a lot more flexibility as the year goes on to decide where you want to allocate that pool of money based on how much is left and what hasn't been allocated, right? And so I call that the capital projects pool, but generally there's $2 million for capital projects, that's all we've got. And when that happens, another project comes in and we want to do it, then we can look at those two projects, we can look at their value propositions, and we can make decisions about whether we want the money that was going to go to project A to actually go into project B because we haven't started it yet, right? And so I recommend companies do the same thing with innovation. They set aside a pool of dollars because you don't know with innovation what you might want to try over the course of the year. And what you want to do there is probably on a quarterly basis plan what you want to try, for innovation. But knowing that you have a pool of dollars that you can put into innovations allows you to do the things that you might want to do without necessarily having to go ask for money for every innovation you want to do, right? And then again, you're basically deciding based on what has the, highest impact, lowest cost at the end of the day, I think is probably the best way to look at things, to go try, right? And then go try those things and allocate dollars in the pool. The reason they're two separate pools, though, is if you roll an innovation into a capital project, then you have to allocate dollars from the capital projects pool over to the full implementation, right? And that's why you need the P&L, because that's a much bigger pool with a much bigger cost and a much bigger ROI, right? So
yeah, the flex that again, putting it that not only within a tech business, with any business, having that flexibility within the budget to be able to spring up ideas, and as you say, having pools, not just all things dedicated to one particular area, but having pools of finance dollars, wherever you want to describe it, ready to be able to drop in if and when ideas come up is really important, and also having the flexibility to be able to review that budget on a quarterly basis rather than having a hard and fast, because things can change,
that's right.
all the time, and you have to be able to have the flexibility within your business to review your budgets, finances, whatever, on a quarterly basis, sometimes as much as a monthly basis, depending on what you're doing or what type of company it is. So yeah, that's great. And one of the big things, sort of to wrap up around innovation and within any sort of delivery or project work, is collaboration. So we all know it's often a collaborative effort, involving various different departments and teams in order to spin up these new innovative ideas, especially when we're looking at how we can make push innovation, keep the business going forward whilst managing the cost. How have you found, or there's no secret to it, there's no silver bullet, everyone has a different idea, but to foster a culture of collaboration to ensure that these ideas or new innovations are realized?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really good. I think it's really important that people feel heard and that they feel like their opinions matter. I think a lot of that has to do with the company's culture itself. If people feel comfortable bringing forward an idea that will have a discussion and won't be shot down and will be valued and appreciated, they're much more likely to bring forward those ideas, right? I like to challenge people when they bring forward an idea or something that they really want to do. Sometimes I'll sit down with a group and say, okay, you really want to do this. We got a bunch of projects we got to do. We don't have any capacity in the resource pool to actually do them among people. So how do you feel about taking on a hackathon over a weekend? Let's pull a business person in. Let's pull a coder in. Let's pull a couple different teams in, and let's create a scenario where it's like, here's the objective. Let's see who can come out with something in a weekend, right? So there's a lot of different ways to foster that culture of innovation. But I find that, just encouraging people to bring ideas forward, encouraging people to have opportunities to go try something out. If someone's not sure of something on one of my teams, right, and they say, we need to go do this and implement this feature. And I'm like, okay, how are we going to do this? How does this piece of software that you want to integrate with work? And they're like, I don't know. Most times I'm going to tell somebody, go stand up a proof of concept around that so that you gain the knowledge you need, right? And so that could be another thing that I would encourage people to do, is just go out and gain the knowledge that you need so that you can be well prepared for it. But a lot of times it depends on the company, the culture, and the circumstance. I would say an open culture fosters innovation, because people in that open culture are much more likely to not only bring up ideas, but take those ideas forward on their own free time or outside of regular work hours, right? I've had people bring things forward to me and be like, I kind of worked on this on the side. What do you think of it? Right? I'm like, oh, wow, that's great. Right. And you sometimes people need to see, taste, and touch something to understand what it really is too. So sometimes I'll turn a group loose and say, okay, you three go, very similar to a hackathon, but I'm going to give you guys a week. Go see what you can come up with, in that accomplishes this goal. Right. And give them a box so that they're not going crazy, but give them something that gives them the ability to breathe. Right. If you give somebody a very specific task, they're obviously going to be able to complete that specific task, which is great when you have an execution task that you need to get done. But these innovation tasks tend to be more open-ended, right? So you need people that are problem solvers, thinkers, right, as much as doers on them. And so it's important that they obviously have a box that they can play in, but that box is broad enough for them that they still have the flexibility to come out with potentially a solution that you hadn't thought of before because of the way that they're thinking, or the learnings that they have, right? And so you don't want to be like, this is the way this innovation should work. No, you want to hand a problem to the team and say, show me how we can solve this problem with technology, right? And within this box of, we have to use the systems that we have already, blah, 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 right? And so that's generally how I approach innovation with teams, is like, we've got a problem. I think we can do something innovative here. Here's the box we want to play in. How much time do you need to show me how we might solve this problem, right?
Yeah. So it's about, so that in that sense, giving people the I've read a book before, Gung Ho, and one of the principles is giving people a field. It's about producing collaborative work and driving process and getting teams to perform better. And one of the principles is having the way of the beaver. It's a strange book. If I explained it to you, you'd think it sounded weird, but it makes a lot more sense if you actually read it. But one of the principles, the way of the beaver, and it's about so the scenario, the analogy is beavers have to build a dam, right, in a lake, and they know they have to build a dam, and that's it.
Yep.
Let's see, go and get this dam built. Go and do it. So there's no place the stick here, place this log here, do this. It's there's a river, a lake, or whatever it is, build a dam, done. And the way they work is they know the parameters that they've got.
Mm-hmm.
This is the lake, this is the thing, this is what we need to do. No one's telling them how to build the dam, what to do, why, so on and so forth. And so they've got to come up with the ideas themselves, which usually it helps people be more creative when they're given autonomy to make decisions on what they want, and building an environment where those decisions are heard and implemented. If it makes sense, then it obviously is going to drive better innovation from from everyone in the team, or better ideas.
Right.
And then also, by having that open dialogue, it does enable the collaboration as well, because people are happy to share something and not be beaten down. And I think that's a really big point for me, that fostering an environment where ideas are listened to. Not all idea, no idea is a bad idea apart from the bad ones. But building that environment and then saying, look, go and do that, and then it gives people, it empowers people. So I'm really I'm a big believer in that myself. Do you ever have have you ever built or seen like a playbook for ideas, in the sense that it's not, the ideas aren't always coming from the senior leadership, they may come from anyone in the business, but how once that's put out, okay, why don't we try this? How that's then taken, I suppose you've sort of discussed it just now around, okay, we'll spin up a little team and go and do like a hackathon, or do some sort of test the theory. But is there like a hard and fast process behind that, or is it sort of just, let's just see how it goes?
Well, a lot of times what happens is innovation comes as a single sentence, right? Or a very broad sweeping statement. We want to have a mobile app, right? Back in 2008, 2009, but nobody really knew what that was, right? And so when we talk about innovation, someone approaches us with a problem. The question that I turn around to them is, okay, if we pursued that, what key features or functions would it need to have for us to be able to test the viability of selling X in a mobile app, or in this new innovative channel, or whatever it is that we're using, right? And so again, you want to box it in at a high level and say, here are the things that we think we need to have there. Login, listing the information, searching for the information, right? And then submitting, a lead, right? Those are the things that need to be there to get us through this life cycle, and see if we can get, more leads out of this thing. Okay, great. So we have the key things that we need to understand to do for the innovation to actually, function, be workable, and to gather the information that we discussed earlier. Now we just basically pop those into Jira as tickets and work through the same development processes that we would work through otherwise, where, the team would basically cut those tickets collaboratively and work on them, right? And I would do it in a way, generally, with innovation, you can do it in a way that's collaborative innovation, where everybody's kind of working together. The ticket's cut right away. The engineer's working with the product person side by side to cut the ticket properly and ask questions real time, so there's not a lot of back and forth. And then the engineer just picks up on it and starts writing the code, right? And starts putting that feature into place and then vets it with the product person. But again, innovation is not an excuse not to have a beginning, middle, and end to something, and it's not an excuse not to, be thoughtful about what you're going to do, right? A lot of people think, oh, we're just going to we're going to take that one sentence and we're just going to start coding and we're going to try to figure out what we want it to be. No, that's not the way to address it, because you'll run into problems that you didn't think about. Think first, design first, then go write your code. That principle still holds true even if you're innovating. You still need to know what to do, right?
But I suppose if you try to jump over some of those steps, or try to run before you can walk, if you will, or whatever, you can use whatever analogy you want. But if you try to do that, no matter how fast you're trying to innovate, you have to stick to basic principles,
right?
Because at the end of the day, when we talked already about striking a balance between costings, innovations, prioritizing innovation, but still obviously keeping those processes in place, keeping the finances there. And if you don't follow the original process of, look where you are, design, test, so on and so forth, and just go ahead, then all of those things around sort of trying to balance the costs are going to come back and bite you on the what, because you're going to have to spend a lot of money to fix the problems that you've tried to solve. And that's probably where a lot of, and then that then comes on to another thing that we're obviously very keen to talk about. Another stage is around the technical debt, legacy systems, is making all these ideas, putting in new ways of working, new code, new whatever else, and then it just becomes useless. And then you've got to spend so much money and time trying to resolve things when in the start, if we'd have just spent a little bit more time, probably save yourself a hell of a lot of dollars.
Well, and one of the challenges with legacy systems is at some point you have to stop piling in, right?
Yeah.
If an architectural legacy conversion can cost millions of dollars and years of time to actually do. And the more you put into a legacy system and continue to build upon that, the more likely it is that the more you're going to have to rip out or unwind downstream. And one of the things that I found consistently with legacy systems is that unless you have somebody that has tribal knowledge in the organization of what happened over time, documentation generally won't cover it and won't give you a good sense of how you got to where you are with a legacy system you've inherited. Trust me, I know I've inherited 2 or 3 and had to learn and you scratch your head and go, why did they do this? But I've learned kind of over time that, a lot of times what people do is they just pile in and then they don't address the technical debt within the system. They just leave it there. So you end up with, oh, we're going to solve this problem a different way over here, right? But never really killing the first way that you had it. And so now you have 2 ways to do the same thing with people using 2 different functions to do the same thing, right? And that makes your system bloated and more expensive to utilize. So there's architectural debt, which is, we're on a monolithic architecture. We need to move to a web services architecture, right? That's a big, broad, expensive activity. And it's kind of what I described with those web services on a smaller scale. But there's also technical debt within your monolithic system. And you make life a lot easier for yourself if you address technical debt in your legacy systems in a timely manner, because the code is cleaner, the code is simpler, it's less stuff to figure out, less business requirements to understand, less why did this happen in the first place, and what happens if I take this away when you're converting to a modern system or modernizing a system, right? And so tech debt is something that should be evergreen, and you should constantly be looking at tech debt and trying to keep it at a certain level and making sure that your code is clean, your system's well documented, and that the things that the corners that you cut get addressed down the line. Architectural debt is a whole different animal, much bigger, broader, and a lot of companies now at this 20-year mark from the dawn of the internet are starting to run into the architectural debt becoming a constraint to their ability to innovate or keep up with competitors. And that's why you see, like, if you look I'm going to take the travel industry as a good example of this. You constantly see new travel affiliate websites popping up. Why? Because TripAdvisor, Expedia, those companies are 20 years old and they have 20-year-old systems that they can't rip out, or it's very expensive and difficult for them to rip out. And they also don't, have websites with millions upon millions of people on them that if they make changes or start re-architecting those could have a huge impact to their business, right? But then you have newer companies that come in, they start up, they don't have any legacy debt at all. And so they're able to provide the data and use newer technologies in ways that the legacy company often do, because their legacy systems are architecturally unable to be compliant or compatible with others. I'm going to give you one example of this from my history, and it's going to be a funny one too, because when I was a consultant years and years ago, I went into Dell, and we had a project with Dell to provide more information on the order management process to the user, right? Well, Dell's entire order management system back in 2007 was running on an HP mainframe.
Okay.
Think about that for a minute. Dell computer was running their core business, their entire order management system was an HP mainframe back in 2007. And they had spent at that point $60 million or more to try to get that out, and it was still in the environment. Now, eventually, I think they did get it out. But as part of their first attempt, they ended up with basically a web service layer sitting on top of the mainframe that allowed them to do some things architecturally that they couldn't do before. But what they found was it was still limiting because the mainframe behaved in certain ways that didn't make a lot of sense to people in terms of the way it generated orders or in terms of the way you generate e-commerce orders today, right? And so their process was kind of broken too because of this mainframe. But that's a good example of where, you know, legacy technology can cost you it cost them tens of millions of dollars to get basically web services sitting on top of it when I was there. And they said they were going to continue that project because Michael Dell did not, the project was called Dell on Dell, because Michael Dell did not want his company running on an HP.
Well,
right? I think since they took the company private, that probably happened, but I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how much money they'd spent, and it was still like in place. And for our project, what we basically had to do was say, no, we can't get this because the mainframe doesn't provide that data. No, we can't get this because the mainframe doesn't provide that data in a way that's queryable, right? So you could see how a mainframe becomes or legacy technology, legacy architecture becomes something that holds you back and doesn't let you compete against your competitors, especially ones that stand up newer infrastructure from the outset. And eventually those companies have that problem too at the end of the day, but they end up having an advantage for a period of time because they can innovate much faster because the technology is much more conducive to it.
That's amazing to hear about the HP, like, you know, they'll be a run off of the HP system. And then there's probably indicative of things that are going on across the market in different companies. There's probably hundreds of these, thousands of these types of stories. But it just goes to show as well that having these legacy systems, technical debt, whatever way you want to look at it, when the whole sort of subject that was the reason we've sort of brought up these types of conversations is businesses are looking to tighten their belts across the board. Budgets are getting cut left, right, and center. We're seeing layoffs for all different reasons, and this is not just in the tech space, but then even projects that we're seeing that we've even had projects lined up, and you know, the clients have said, look, we're going to hold off for a minute and until things level up a little bit. But do you think there's an instance where, well, there certainly is, but it's evident. But in your opinion, where businesses sometimes just need to say, look, we're going to have to hold our breath. We're going to have to spend this money because in the long run, by improving the architecture, by improving the systems that we use, we're actually going to save money because of X, Y, and Z reasons. So it's about looking at looking at it as value rather than cost, if that's the right way of putting it. But saying, well, actually, it's going to cost us now X amount of millions to do this project to move. You know, an example. I started asking a question. I'm going to answer it myself, but yeah, you could jump in as well. But an example we did a lot of work with central government in a previous life. We was working in the UK, working with the Cabinet Office, and they were spending fortunes every year. The Cabinet Office outsourcing all of their IT to Fujitsu. All of their computers, the systems, hardware, all the services, everything. And it was then they decided to go with their new sort of agenda within the government and make it cloud first and bring everything, all their IT in-house. So to do a complete technology transformation, remove Fujitsu from it, and then bring all their IT in-house, bring your own device systems, you know, mobiles instead of landlines, hot desking, being able, and then moving everyone onto Office 365. I think it was from moving everyone onto Office 365. That was a huge undertaking. It took like 3 years and many millions of pounds. But the flip side to that is over the next 5 years, they saved year on year an extra 14% on their IT spend. So that money was recouped. But what we're seeing more of now is businesses saying, well, let's hold off on spending the money, because we know see how the market goes. But at the same time, look, you've got all these technical debt, all these legacy systems. You're not innovating quick enough, so at times you're gonna need to just pull the trigger. Is that your thoughts as well? Or
Yeah, there's definitely times where that's the case. I mean, at the end of the day, like the market conditions are obviously a factor here, and there's two examples that come straight to mind about what you were just describing. One is a professional example. One's a little bit more personal. The professional example was at a time when I was a consultant, we were getting ready to sign a contract with Papa John's Pizza to redo their website. And this was right as Apple was announcing, right after Apple had announced the App Store, maybe a couple months after. And I remember in the initial blush, I was the sales engineer on the project. And in the initial blush, we talked about a mobile app. And I was like, do you guys want a mobile app? It's probably going to cost this much money additional to the project to get that done, but it would be good to know if you want that now so we can work on both in tandem and release them. Didn't want to do it. No interest in it at all, no matter how much I tried to tell them about the benefits this would have to them in the future and all that stuff. 2 days after that meeting, Pizza Hut released an app in the App Store. They could not come back to me fast enough.
Yeah.
Want an app, right? And so sometimes people are just like, no, until all of a sudden they realize we have to be competitive, or we have to do something to make sure that we can stay competitive or keep in there. And it really ignites a fire under them. And they wanted that project, and we put that project out there for it. We put that mobile app out there for them on time, on schedule. Another example that I have, and this is a more personal one, my kids play Minecraft. Okay, so when my kids were younger, Minecraft, you could download it on iPad, you could download it for computer, you could download it on console, and each version of Minecraft that you would download was a different code base. Okay, now Minecraft was bought by Microsoft, some years ago, and Microsoft said Minecraft, the company that makes Minecraft, decided they were going to pause everything. All new feature development was going to get paused. They were going to consolidate all of their code lines into one, so that they didn't have to start releasing new features different places, different times, and have different teams managing different code. Okay, so they took it all and consolidated it into one code base. And for 1.5 to 2 years, nobody got any new features in Minecraft from users. And users were upset. They didn't understand why. But if you fast forward a year or two later, they are delivering much more broad, robust changes to the game than they ever could before, because they only have to do it once, right, and make sure that it works once, and it'll work on all these different platforms. They called that the unification project. And so that's an example of a time where you understand the economies of scale aren't there for what you're doing. You can't keep doing it this way. You have to start consolidating things in, but you can't keep piling into the things that you have economies of scale. So sometimes you have to take a pause, and you have to say, you know what? This is the year of re-architecture. We are going to focus on converting systems to something more modern, or consolidating code to be more maintainable. And then next year, we're going to come out guns blazing in terms of features and roadmaps, because we're going to be able to move 10x the amount of time that we can now. We can take all the engineers that we have and have them all working on this code line, which gives us so much more throughput than we ever had having them all work on different teams, right? So there absolutely are times where it makes sense to do that. Sometimes they're driven by competitive factors. Sometimes they're driven by market conditions. Other times they're driven by, just being smart about identifying you can't really scale this business in this way, and you have to make a fundamental foundational change to continue to scale your business up. That takes a lot of courage to do. It's hard for people to stomach that. But if you do it, knowing that you're going to get a better outcome, other people will come along for the ride. It'll just take them a while to see what that outcome is. And customers now are happy with Minecraft because of what they did. But during the time where there wasn't any new releases and they were doing that re-architecture, there was a lot of people that were like, what's going on? Why aren't we getting any releases? Why is this taking so long, right? I paid for this game. Why am I not getting new content, et cetera, et cetera?
I mean, look, we could probably go on for hours about this subject, because it is something that affects every single type of business in every single way, not just the tech side, just businesses like mine, innovating, cost, looking at ways things have been done, how they need to change, implement, trying not to, as you say, chuck in legacy systems, legacy ways of working on top of each other, because all it's then going to do is create some sort of spaghetti code where you just end up getting lost, and then it just becomes even bigger struggle to turn the Titanic in that sense. So look, I really, as always, appreciate your time, Bryan. So
Yep.
thank you very much for these insights. I'm sure there's a hell of a lot of value there for our network. As always, I'd like to say, if anyone would like to reach out to me personally, obviously you've got my little LinkedIn's probably the best route. Bryan, if people want to reach out to you, I presume it's the same.
Yep. You can search for Bryan Mishkin on LinkedIn. Just don't pick the guy that works at Square. That's not me.
Okay.
There's another Bryan Mishkin who spells his name exactly the same as me, and he works at Square. So
I'll tag Bryan in the when we post this out, so the other Bryan from Square doesn't get contacted. But look, really appreciate your time, mate. Thank you very much. Loads of value there, and again, brilliant insights. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Patrick. Really appreciate it.